Hey everybody, welcome to the Boston Micro Soldering stream. We're going to do an early morning charger port repair on a Galaxy S7. This is a port-only replacement, so we're not changing out the flex. And my apologies, I have no idea what the audio levels are going to be. I've got the air conditioner blasting about 3 feet away from the microphone, so hopefully this isn't just a big pile of noise. So this guy here is a G930U. It's just the kind of generic US version of the Galaxy S7, the one you would have bought from like Samsung.com or Best Buy. And you know, normally when you're buying these charger ports for most Galaxies, you've got the whole flex here. You know, antenna contacts, charger port, microphone. On the older Galaxies that have buttons on the front, you've got these LEDs and the touch functions on the front. And basically, the way that this guy gets installed, let me see if I can change this to the main cam. Yeah, the way that this guy gets installed, you open it from the back, you put the flex down, but then these two soft menu keys, the back button and the menu button, basically have to wrap around to the front of the phone. So the idea is when Samsung's making this phone, when they're assembling it in the factory, you start with just the frame, they install the charger port from the back, they slip each of these little peninsulas out to the front before putting the OLED in place. So it's really not very practical to take in Galaxy S6s, Galaxy S7s, Note 5s, for charger port replacement, doing these flexes, unless you're very comfortable removing a $100, $150 part in the OLED in order to slip these little flexes through. Now this Galaxy in particular already has a slightly cracked screen. So we look over here, some scratches, but there's you know, some obvious cracks in this corner. So I have absolutely no confidence in my ability to take this working cracked OLED off. Let me just show it to you guys powering on. I can get my battery around the tape here. OLED's working fine at the start of this. Phone boots, phone charges with a wireless charger. Here we've got our Samsung logo. But, you know, with those cracks to the cover glass there, I'm never going to be able to remove this screen, change the whole flex, and expect that I'm not going to damage the display in the process. Let me just get this battery out. So what's our second option? Well, our second option, if we look at this in the microscope, would be to change just the charger port. So this is the same port between the S7 and the S7 Edge. There may be a couple other Samsungs in this generation that share it. It is a very different port from the S6. And here's a look at what that flex looks like without a port on it. So what we've done is already taken a spare flex cable. We're not going to install the whole flex. I have desoldered the charger port from this flex already. We have our micro USB only here. Needs to be cleaned up a little bit. And what we're going to do is leave our flex cable, our working flex cable, inside the phone. Desolder it from this from the old PCB and solder the new port onto that PCB. And just before we get started, let's take a look at the old charger port. Pins are bent up. Pretty badly. So there's no fixing this old port through cleaning. In fact, the port is extremely clean to start with. We're missing one pin, and then we've got 4 bent pins. So that's got to come out. Now, first things first, when we're trying this type of replacement on an S6, an S7, a Note 5, whatever, get the battery out. So it's super important if you're working with an iron, if you're working with hot air. Just remove the possibility of a bomb on your desk. You know, a half-charged or a fully charged lithium-ion, you really don't want to have some sort of slip-up. You stick a 400-degree iron into it, or you're looking under the microscope and you don't realize that your hot air is pointed at it, and you got something that's going to catch fire right in front of your face. So just get the battery out, move it to another side of your desk before you take out sharp tweezers, hot irons, and hot air. Okay. We can zoom out as much as we can on this. Now, our port is secured with 2 screws, and of course it's soldered. So once we get our housing components out, we're basically going to be removing all of these screws when we take the loudspeaker and antenna off. So now this flex is really just held down by a little bit of adhesive along the bottom. Normally what I recommend is just, instead of prying, take some 100% alcohol, run it underneath, so try to get it to go under the flex. I have already lifted this flex, but the idea is you just want a little bit to go underneath it, and it's going to make lifting this up a breeze. So you just want to apply some very light pressure to every edge that you can until it starts to lift up. You can lift it up, a millimeter or two, and then add some more IPA. You're basically just leveraging it up until you get to the point that you can actually start sliding the port out of the housing, right? Because that's our goal. We want to be able to push the port towards the battery compartment. You can take a small screwdriver, whatever, grab it from these screw holes and just kind of lift up. You don't have a lot of working room, right? Because this flex, remember, it's still installed in both the front and the back of the device. It's being held on by these little LED and capacitive buttons. There are light in the front, capacitive touch. So this guy, when you pull on it, you're basically pulling on these edges of the flex. You see here how it kind of runs through a hole in the housing, runs through a hole in the housing. So we don't have a lot of wiggle room. But we do have enough space to get some thermal insulation in there, because we're basically working in an area with a housing that's half metal and half plastic. So we can get a coin in there to start. Usually like to drop in a dime or a nickel or something underneath it, just so we have some little barrier if our iron slips. We've got something hard and metallic underneath it. I can tape that in place. And I also just want to add some aluminum tape behind our OLED, which is really going to be, all of this black here is just tape behind the OLED. And if I hit this too hard with the metal tool, I'm going to crack the OLED. I'm going to switch my dime to a nickel. also just going to tape that in place because I don't want it wiggling around. Oh, something I would recommend, which I already had done off camera, is adding some tape to our microphone, because we are going to be working with liquid flux. See if I can get that in the camera here. So our little microphone sits in front of this rubber cap. You can see I added a little piece of Kapton tape on top of the microphone hole already. Just so, you know, if there's alcohol in the area, if there's liquid flux, it's not going to go into the mic. I'm not too concerned about the heat with the mic. These can be reflowed a couple times before you start to damage them. At least that's what the manufacturers usually say. But it's dead if alcohol goes in that little hole. So just make sure you cover the mic hole. Alright, and what we need to do to start with this is tin up all of the pins to lower their melting point. So we're going to add some leaded solder to that, and then we're going to add leaded solder to the legs from the other side of the board. And then we're going to have tons of flux to clean out of this connector, which is going to be a little bit annoying, but that's just part of the job. And we're going to add even more background noise to the mix with the air filter. I don't know if I have enough clearance for this. No. Switch to a J-tip. Why are you not happy? There we go. Alright, so tin up our iron. Remember, this connector for the headphone jack is plastic. We really have to avoid touching that. Just got this J-tip, and it's really great for getting into tight corners. We're going to hit these joints from the other side. Which, to be perfectly honest, is going to be very difficult to put on video. I really don't think there's any camera angle for this. So basically what I'm doing is I'm folding this back as much as I can. I've got the port at like a 45-degree angle to the body of the device. Just going to add some flux to the 4 pins that are there. And I'm just flowing those joints again with the leaded solder. Trying not to seriously burn my left hand in the process. Come back and look for the microphone. That going. Can't really get it flipped from that angle. Next, we're going to see if I can apply enough heat using my largest bevel tip here from the Weller directly to the bottom. So I'm basically going to be trying to apply heat, this is the new port, to the ground plane underneath it, underneath the old port. Let's see if we can get this off without the need for hot air. Can't quite guarantee this is going to be successful, so we might have to switch to the hot air, but I really want to avoid using hot air inside this device. Both because of the plastic on the housing, but also just the ICs that are on this flex. Find a safe way to grip this phone. I'm going to wrap a little bit of cloth for padding around the front and the back and put it in the Hako, the Omnivice. Not too tight because I don't really want to apply too much pressure to the screen. So I'm going to use my forceps to hold this port up at an angle. I had some flux on the bottom of this board, but I'm just going to add a little more. I'm going to put a little bit of solder onto my iron tip, really just to help transfer heat better. I'm going to go with those legs one by one, never losing contact with the PCB. kind of massaging the underside of the PCB, hoping to melt that ground plane all at once. And I'm keeping the beveled tip as flat as possible. Nope. This guy does not want to move, and I don't have a tip as large as this for the Hako. The Hako would have a little bit more power on the handpiece, but not really a large enough tip to transfer it. I'm going to give this a shot with the J-tip, but I don't think it's going to go. What I really need is a very large beveled tip for the Hako. So instead I'm going to use the flattest part of my J. Yeah, there's not really any transfer there. We're going to use hot air. That's alright. We've already got our taping in place. Now remember, I'm not pointing the hot air directly at the bottom of the device. I do have my flex bent up at about a 45-degree angle, maybe slightly more than that. Whatever the flex is going to allow you to do without ripping. I want to grip my charger port only. And I don't want to be pulling hard. Just light pressure. And there it goes. Riskier, but much faster. And we have no pulled pads. Don't see any either bubbling around the underfilled components or any shifting. Let's take a look at that flex. Just a lot of flux to clean up. So first things first, we are going to suck the solder out of those holes with some whip. Add a little more flux to the area. And I'm going to switch back to the beveled tip for this. Sorry for the camera angle, it's not really possible to position this so that I can work on it and record it at the same time without a second person. Flatten the ground pads. also want to flatten out the USB pins. Because there is working space there, so I can put the new port down on a flat surface and then add solder around it. Yep. Everything very clean and flat. Now I want to get this flux up because it's just going to be, if I have to clean this once the board's there, it's going to be a nightmare to clean out the headphone jack connector there. Thankfully this is an OLED phone, it's not an LCD phone, which means if I get a couple, like, you know, errant drops of alcohol around here, it's not going to go into the screen. If we were doing some sort of similar job on a phone with an LCD, you have to be so careful with the alcohol. It's going to get into the backlight, and you're just going to have these shadows in the screen, which are absolutely impossible to remove. With the OLED phone, we have to avoid getting a lot of alcohol in there because we don't want to lessen this, you know, the bond between the screen and the phone. We wouldn't want the screen to start lifting if we totally flooded this phone with alcohol. But we literally can't damage anything with alcohol other than the microphone, which we already added tape to. And of course you could fill a connector like this headphone jack connector with flux, and then, or this antenna, coax cable, or where's the second one? 1, 2, and then you just can't plug something in because it's clogged. Alright. Nice and clean. That's dried factory flux from years ago. Alright, before we put our port on, I just want to clean it up. I had noticed, looking at this before, not under the microscope, I saw some green. Yeah, this is really fantastic. So this was a brand new port. Brand new. As often comes out of the Shenzhen markets, brand new was a port that was pulled out of a phone. And clearly we have some corrosion in here. This is just flux from when I removed it. I had some nasty Radio Shack flux that I was using on the other desk. Kind of wish I just waited till I came over here to take this port off, but it is what it is. Clean all of our flux off because I'm not wearing gloves and I do not want that on me. Running out of long Q-tips. Ooh, this is some nasty flux. I wish I'd started this with the MTech that I always use. See, we got a very clean lift, no bent pins. So this port structurally is brand new. Yeah, it's in good shape. If I did have a second S7 port, I would absolutely be changing to that right now. But since we only have our slightly corroded part, we are going to clean it as much as humanly possible, including cleaning it of my flux. seeing as this is an instructional video, of course the advice would be don't use a charger port that has water damage. But you may find yourself in this situation where you don't stock the part, right? You've got one at your disposal. Some fool took it out of the phone and sold it to you as brand new. And you have to make it as good as new before you give it to your customer. And this is mechanically a very good port. I mean, it looks great, except for those two rusted lines. So we just gotta polish that copper oxide out. It's a super clean port. Now it's a refurbished port. See if I can blow this out without getting the alcohol in my eyes. Scrub out some. These forceps are great for this. You can see that oxide just polish away. This is pretty good. Just got to make sure there's not so much oxidized material that the charger fails to make contact or anything has a partial short. This looks pretty clean so far. Very, very clean. Another close-up look at this guy. Less close-up, too close. That can be flattened a little bit. So I love these forceps. I can just grab it. I can just absolutely let go, no hands. Okay, that's quite flat. Pins are very straight. Straight pins. It's hard to see on video, but the feel of this is that it is very, very flat. So I'm going to try to secure this down a little better so that our flex stops flopping, and we are going to solder the back half of this, and then flip this over and solder the front mounting pin. So basically we're going to get a little bit of material into these two legs, we're going to do the USB pins, and we're going to do the front two legs. Okay, so our flex has no motion at all. I can poke it, I can prod it, it's not going to go anywhere. It means when I manipulate the port, move the port, our phone's not moving around and our flex isn't moving around. A little bit of base here. With my eyes, I do need to do this part under the microscope. Okay. So I'm going to use one hand to kind of push this guy down, and a second hand just to add a little bit of material to those two holes. A little easier to get my flex under the USB pins now. And my J-tip for the Hako is going to be helpful again. Sorry to keep switching tips, but it is what needs to happen. Love the hot swap ability on this. This is the FM2027, which I've used for many months, but owned only for a little bit. And I really wish I had bought one of these for myself a long time ago. Okay. So we're going to push down on our port. Put this mount here for the screw that's a little bit in my way. That's okay. You don't care about adding a bunch of errant solder to ground. If I had a third hand, I would heat this pad and come in with a spool of solder. Just do not have that third hand right now. Or ever. I need to be applying downward pressure to this. Can't get under it. Well, Let's see if the micro pencil's got enough heat to help. Possibly. Not enough heat to do much. But we just need to start this so that it stays in place when we go underneath and really anchor it down. Okay, we got a little bit float in there. That's all we need. We're just starting this. So 7 USB pins. We can do with the micro pencil. Focus. Good. Let's clean that up so we can see it better. The burned factory flux out. And as much as that green makes you think copper rust, it's not rust, it's actually just burned factory flux. Whatever brand type they use. Okay, so I'm going to release my flex so I can get it back up at that high 45-degree angle, and I can do the mounting pins underneath the legs of the port. And I do this at a weird angle again that's really hard to record. But one thing that I do want to show you is that we're starting off with this port really flush with the flex. So this is the back of the flex. See the edge. Right up against the port. There's no lift angle at all. So what we're going to do sort of off camera is add the material, flow the legs closest to the port, and then we're going to reflow those first two legs that we did from the back. That's going to be most of the strength. Beautiful assistant. Again, all while trying not to burn the hand that's holding the port. And I want my bevel for this. Okay. Should be pretty well mounted. Get that on camera. And it's still pretty hot. So there is now a lot of burn flux there. I don't really care to clean it all up, but I'll just I'll wipe enough so that you can see. Black stuff is just some adhesive that kind of help the flex, down. Alright, so those joints are fully flowed. Better angle. All four of those are very well flowed. And even though we don't have our center ground plane flowed, it really doesn't matter because the structure of this port is going to be held down by these two screws. So this is still going to be very strong once the phone is put back together. So we're going to take all of the insulation out of here. My coin. Now I can clean up some of that flux. Or alcohol ooze, whatever it is. Notice I did not get any alcohol onto this little rubber. This is the the waterproofing for the mic. Peel up microphone tape after fixing my tweezers. Mic sits right there. Notice we did pull a bit hard on the flex, but there's no tearing. No tearing. What we need to do is lift up this edge so that it goes towards the battery. It's best to leave this unplugged from the board so you have a little more play on this side. Slide this guy down. Push where it's strongest. You can see here, by the way, that we had flow through of those joints from when we hit it on the back with the bevel tip. Push this guy back down where it belongs. That mic's going to be held down by the speaker assembly. And we just want to see if there's any more flux to clean out of here. A little bit. This can be wiped again. I don't want that headphone jack to be clogged or the antennas. And here's a look at our USB pins. So our mounts are flowed all the way through. Can't really see the front ones, but they're flowed. The back is pretty strong. And we're gonna have these screw holes go straight into the housing. They go, through the USB port, right into the housing. No bubbling of this overfill. A little bit of air and solder. And let's test this guy out. Alright, first things first, I gotta get my board plugged back into this flex, which means getting a bunch of other flexes out of my way. Unplug the screen, power button, and the home button. Lifts this guy up. The very first flex you want to plug in is the big one, charger port. That way I can see it, I can feel it, I can hear it. Move my home button flex out of the way, my power button and my screen out of the way. Pull up the sensors and the earpiece. And lastly, the volume buttons. And our front camera's off to the side out of the way. You can plug that in later. Okay. Battery. Now, this is one of those Samsungs which the wireless charging flex. Let me see if I can show it to you on the microscope. So the wireless charging flex has, I believe this is just like a current sensing resistor, something like that. I'm not really sure how the circuit works, but They use this flex as a temperature sensor for the battery. So if you don't have the wireless charging assembly in place, you don't have this flex here, and it is going to pause your charging with like a thermal warning. So you don't want to test charging on one of these unless you have the wireless charging flex. You don't really need to screw it down, just kind of hold it with a thumb, you know, where all of these contacts are on the board, and that should be enough. You can grab 1 or 2 screws. Okay, let's get power bank. This should be a 2 amp. We have our meter. Can't find a micro USB. New one. And last thing too, I did check to make sure that the inside of our port is still clean. Let's do that before we plug it in. And yep, our port is clean. This will be more flush once we put those 2 screws in, so I'm not worried about that right now. I just want to make sure it works before we start to reassemble the device. Power this guy on. Hold down the wireless charging flex, and we have 1 amp, 1.1 amps. Perfect. Should get, I can flip this, a charging animation on the screen, so that shows us we don't have any OLED damage. Let's take a look at that cover glass, make sure we didn't crush something by accident. I think we're very friendly to this machine. No, glass looks good. You take a look at those cover glass cracks again. See, nothing is spread. Still the same, just, you know, big crack from the side going to the home button. We power this guy on. We are booting. And we have a nice steady 1.1 amps coming out of the Duracell charger. I don't have a Samsung fast charge here. We're going to test that later before we give it back to the customer. Normally we want to make sure that this switches over to the 9 volt mode. This phone's 70% charged, so 9 volts, if we saw 9 volts and 1 amp, that would be pretty standard. If it was dead battery fast charging, maybe 9 volts and 1.5 amps. And we just want to show this guy fully booted. The rest of this reassembly we're going to do off camera because I actually got to get going. But that is how you finish the port-only replacements for a Galaxy S7, Galaxy S7 Edge Flex. There's literally no difference to this process on the Edge version of the phone. If you're doing Galaxy S6, a Note 5, it's precisely the same process. If you've got an S6 Edge, guess what? You don't have to deal with this nonsense. It's actually easier on the S6 Edge. You can always just change the whole flex. So thanks for tuning in, and if you have any questions, please leave them in the comments. Have a great Father's Day.